excited to be here and just tell you a little bit about our program and what's happened over the last 10 years. And so basically what I'd like to do is just share with you a little bit about how the city of Fort Worth went from having basically no stormwater program with any sort of proactive bent to it. It's purely reactive, really just kind of an afterthought, a little part of the streets program, to where we are today, where we've got some of the basic building blocks in place for being much more strategic and much more proactive. We've still got a long ways to go. Some of your communities may be a lot farther down the road with this than we are, but we do have some good building blocks in place. I just want to kind of share with you how we went as a community from a place where we basically neglected the issue to where it is being addressed in a substantive way. Obviously, resources is a huge part of that. You're going to bring some resources to bear. Harriet touched on those things, and I can tell you what that's looked like in the city of Fort Worth. Also, one of the things that you're really faced with, or we were really faced with this, was not only did we not have any funding, we didn't have the basic information we needed about drainage in the city of Fort Worth to know what to do with the funding. And so that was a big part of what we've done, and I'll tell you about some of those things as well. Once you have that information, once you find out, what we found out again is the problem's way bigger than the resources we have, and so prioritization became a really, really important thing. How are we going to make the best use of the funds we have? And even with that, knowing the city of Fort Worth cannot handle this themselves, in order to make the kind of progress that we really wanted to make, we needed partners. And so we started down the road of finding places where our interests and other people's interests intersect so that we can leverage our funding against others and get more done without it just being something that the city's doing. So let me talk a little bit about how we kind of got the program started. And of course, it all has to do with rain, and so I want to throw some statistics here at you, not really for the purpose of some sort of academic exercise, but really, I think, identifying why it is in a city like Fort Worth and maybe many others across the country where this is such a neglected issue and still is a hard program to maintain momentum. So here's some statistics from the city of Fort Worth on rainfall over the 116 years that we've been gathering the data. And so you see somewhere between 2 and 4 inches on average per month, and what that works out to on an annual basis is about 33 inches of rain a year. But if your area is like my area, the words like average and normal when it comes to weather really are fairly meaningless. And so really what you have to figure out is what is it that's causing your problem. And we look at our statistics and we see that the standard deviation in that 33 inches every year is pretty wild. I'm not a statistician, but I know that that means that really what is more accurate in terms of saying what to expect in the city of Fort Worth is you're probably going to get somewhere between maybe 24 and 42 inches of rain in any given year, which is a pretty wide swing. It can make a very significant difference in terms of what you experience. 2015 was a great example of this. So you see the green is the historical average. You see what happened in the city of Fort Worth in 2015. I think we had a couple of 3 months in there that were fairly close to the monthly average. The rest of them were wildly different, 4 times more. And in some cases, you see in July and August there, we actually went back into a drought cycle after some of that. And so what we had, average annual over 116 years, 33 inches a year, is 2015, the single rainiest year in the history of Fort Worth, almost twice that. But the interesting thing is, about 2015, we didn't have all that much flooding. The issue in areas like the city of Fort Worth isn't how much does it rain in a year. It's not even do you get 17 inches in 1 month like we did in May, and it's not even do you get 8 or 9 inches over 36 or 48 hours. Really what tells the tale in a city like Fort Worth is flash flooding, and it's these very short, high intensity duration storms that really tell the tale. This is an excerpt from a report that I get after every major rainfall that shows rain gauge data. We've got about 50 rain gauges that we monitor, and I just took an excerpt of those. And so what you see, and this is a storm in April of 2015, in 15-minute increments, we had in these particular locations anywhere from about 9/10 of an inch to about 1.6 inches. There's a lot of areas in the city of Fort Worth where if you get that intensity of rainfall in a 15 or 30-minute period, you're going to have major flooding. And that's really what tells the tale. And if I expanded this rain gauge data and showed you all 50, you would show and see that in some of the areas in the city of Fort Worth, a lot of the areas you have maybe 1/10 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. And so it's very widely dispersed, it's very localized, it's very sporadic in its nature. And so basically, when we're in that sort of situation like we are in the city of Fort Worth, my conclusion has been that is a big reason why drainage has historically been neglected, because it's very sporadic. When it does happen, it happens in a very localized area. Therefore, when it comes to competing for resources with things like crime control and streets and traffic, it's not nearly the prominent issue for the policymakers and decision makers in the city, and so it gets neglected for a long time, and it continues to be a hard thing to maintain momentum because it's just not happening as frequently. It's not happening as on a widespread basis as a lot of other things that people experience. The game changer for the city of Fort Worth was 2004. It was the seventh rainiest year on record, third rainiest June on record, 47.6 inches in 2004, 10.5 inches in June. But again, it wasn't those statistics. It was really that we had a lot of the very flood-prone areas in the city of Fort Worth get those 2 inches in 15 minutes, or 3 inches in 30 minutes. And so these are scenes that we saw around the city of Fort Worth in 2004. A lot of property damage there in the top right corner. Happily, in that particular location, the driver of that car was able to get out. However, at that particular location, at a different storm in 2004, there was a young lady and 2 small children that drowned. So that was the sort of thing that happened that really got the attention of the community. Had a bunch of people come down to city council meetings and say, basically, we know this doesn't happen that often, and we know it doesn't happen all over the city, but when it does happen, it's a really bad problem, and we want the city government to do something about it. So the mayor and the city council directed the city manager to study this issue and figure out what can the city do to try and start getting caught up on something that we basically had neglected for 80 or 90 years. So that resulted in the establishment of a stormwater utility in the city of Fort Worth. In 2006, we established it. It was the result of a very inclusive process, spent a lot of time with the community, with just kind of average citizens, with technical experts from the community, trying to look at this together and figure out what is the best way for the city of Fort Worth to try and address this issue. We established an organization, very straightforward mission, and we kind of gathered up what we were trying to do under kind of a couple of no-brainer mantras. One is we want to make things better. We've got a drainage system in the city of Fort Worth. In many cases, it's not adequate to handle the level of rainstorm, but we want it to do the best it can do. We need to maintain the system we have. That's something that hadn't been happening in the city of Fort Worth. And we also want to identify where those major problem areas are and start the process of actually trying to fix it. While we're making things better, we want to make sure we're not going to make things worse. For about the last 10 years, the city of Fort Worth has been at the top of the list of the fastest growing communities, over 500,000 in the United States. We've got a lot of open land, we've got a lot of development going on. That means a lot more buildings, that means a lot more parking lots, that means a lot more rain runoff. So we recognize we can't allow that to keep making things worse. We have to put things in process, or in the process of the new development cycle, to make sure that was not making things worse. So that's what we were trying to do. Obviously, though, to do things like that, resources is the issue. So here's how the city of Fort Worth funds our stormwater program, with a stormwater utility fee. I heard her alternative name. I'll go propose whether we should call that something different than a stormwater utility fee. So we charge every property owner in the city of Fort Worth that we legally can. There are some that are exempted by state law, the stormwater utility fee, and it's basically a certain charge per month per 2,600 square feet of impervious surface. So you can see as the program was developed, those green bars are what they initially recommended the city of Fort Worth do. There was a recognition that we can't shock the community with a very large fee right out of the get-go, and so we ramped it up as the recommendation, and the actuals are the yellow bars, and you can see for the first 5 years, which is the extent of the recommendation from the initial program, we pretty well matched those fees. In FY12, we were able to get it up to where it is now, $5.40 per month per 2,600 square feet of impervious surface, but you can see it's been flat since then. Most of that time, the city of Fort Worth's been kind of in a drought cycle. We haven't had much flooding. It's kind of gone off the radar. It's a little bit more on the radar after 2015, but again, there just has not been the appetite to continue the progress, but we've made a lot of progress. Here's what we do. Here's the services that we deliver. We maintain the infrastructure. We go out and look at the system. We find the problem areas. We develop projects to try and fix flooding. We deliver those projects. So that's kind of the make things better piece of the equation. And we have a part of our organization that reviews new development, reviews development in the floodplain. That's to keep things from getting worse. And And then like every organization, we have a business support function that manages human resources, budget and finance and equipment and those sorts of things. Here's the money associated with all of that, broken down by those categories. So in FY07, the first full year of the stormwater utility, our budget was $10 million. This year, in FY16, we're about $36 million. And you can see where that money has gone. So the capital delivery piece in absolute dollar value is the one that's experienced by far the greatest growth, and I'll show you a little more detail on that in a moment. The maintenance program has grown considerably. In absolute dollar value terms, the other pieces aren't as big, but like the development services, for example, before 2007, the city of Fort Worth had one employee who spent maybe a quarter of his time looking at new development to try and make sure that it wasn't creating drainage problems. Now we've got 6 full-time employees. We've got 2 consultants that we use to look at everything that comes through the city of Fort Worth in new development to try and make sure that it meets standards and doesn't make things worse. On the capital improvement program, again, here's what happened before the stormwater utility. Drainage issues were just a small part of the city's overall capital improvement programs, the general obligation bond issues. So over about a 30-year period, the city invested about $1.6 million a year on average in addressing stormwater issues through capital programs. Since the stormwater utility has been established, we've had 3 revenue bond issues. So these are all based strictly on the revenue stream from the stormwater utility, and what that works out to has been about $17 million a year over the 9 years that we're delivering those projects. We're about to spend the last part of that funding here this year. And we've also ramped up a pay-as-you-go program. Through 14, it was averaging about $2.5 million a year. This year, we're going up to more like $5 or $6 million a year because we don't have a lot of support right now for a fee increase or anything that it would take to issue more debt. So in order to do capital, we're going to have to do a lot of it on a pay-as-you-go basis until kind of the community mood turns in terms of supporting more debt for the stormwater program. So that's kind of the resources piece of it. Again, as I mentioned, we were lacking vital information. If somebody called us one day, for example, this property right there, which is a very high-dollar restaurant on the west side of Fort Worth, if he called us and said, hey, it's raining, there's this inlet in front of my property, it's not taking any water. What we would have to do is we have to send someone out there to look at it, see what it was, and they'd probably have to come back to City Hall and go in this room that we call the vault, pull out a bunch of drawers and try and find some drawings and figure out what's going on. We didn't know, in a lot of cases, where the pipe was, where it went, how big it was, what condition it was, except for those guys that had been with the organization for 30 years and had everything in their head. Now, after spending about 5 years and $10 million going through the city, inventorying a lot of these things, when that property owner calls and says that inlet won't take any more water, people like me, a lot of people in my organization, the guys driving around in the field can pull up on their computer information like this on that inlet, which has information on how big it is, when's the last time it was inspected, what kind of condition was it in, what kind of manholes does it have, that sort of information. You can pull up in the field on your computer the original drawings. You can pull up a picture of the thing so you can actually see what you're dealing with. Similarly, if we notice in the street out there that the road's sinking and it's over one of our lines, maybe the line's broken and it's eroding, we can bring up similar information in the field, the size, the condition, the age, and those sorts of things. So we've come a long ways in terms of having the sort of information that makes us much more efficient and effective in responding to these problems, both on the maintenance side and the capital side. But this is still an area where there's a lot more room to grow. If we want to really be operating in what would be considered an asset management framework, we've got to layer in there a lot more information on condition assessment. It's not just how old it is, it's not just what material it is. We need to really know what kind of condition it's in order to know how it's performing. We have to assess things like criticality. So a pipe that's in bad condition in one part of town is not as big of an issue as it is in some other parts of town. We really need to understand those things in order to prioritize our resources. We need information on other pieces of the system, like channels and dams, easements and maintenance agreements. So this is part of our organization that's continuing to grow. We've made a lot of strides. We also have come a long ways in really understanding the flood risks citywide. This is a little piece of the city of Fort Worth, and basically what we did is we paid a consultant to come in, take the information that we understood about the drainage system capacity, run a hydraulic model over it, and say how much water runoff can the drainage system take And when it overflows, where's the water going to go? And how deep is it going to be? And so this helps us really get a much better handle on the level of severity of the flooding problem across the city of Fort Worth, so we can figure out, here's the areas we need to go into first. We've got a lot of information anecdotally, but as Harriet was mentioning, there's a lot of parts of towns where you don't even hear about it. You don't even know they have a flooding problem. And this sort of thing helps us do that. We can take that sort of information, and what we've done is we've gone in and we've graded every drainage basin in the city of Fort Worth. So all this colored stuff is the city of Fort Worth. All these little sub parts are the drainage basins. There's about 300 drainage basins in the city of Fort Worth. Based on the pipe capacity, the level of risk, what happens when it floods, we've gone in and we've assigned each basin a grade based on how it performs relative to carrying the runoff and protecting people and property. You can see in the central city area here, most of them are D and F, which those are the older parts of the city where they were designed and built long before current standards, and so that wasn't surprising. But again, that gives us the sort of information that helps us direct our efforts, and then we can drill down a little deeper. And so we've been conducting more detailed engineering assessments, and you can again see most of that's in the central city. Go into the neighborhood, go to a channel, go to a particular watershed, and drill down a little deeper and start trying to figure out what is it going to take to fix these problems so that we can prioritize things, so that we can figure out what our strategy is going to be, so that we can identify opportunities for partnerships. So we've learned a lot about our drainage system here in the last 10 years. There's still a long ways to go with that. And another thing that we're learning more about is the importance of really understanding historically the flooding events that we've had. What is the rainfall that's actually causing those? We've got, again, those 50-plus rain gauges. But again, in the city of Fort Worth, you can have a rain gauge in one place, and a mile away, the actual experience is very, very different. And so if you can't just take a rain gauge and say we had a flooding event and really know what level of rain event caused that problem. There's organizations out there, the one that we've worked with is named View Incorporated, that takes rain gauge and stream gauge data and also the radar data associated with that specific storm. By overlaying those and integrating those, they can come up with a much more precise understanding of what the rain was at a particular point in the city. And that's really, really helpful towards figuring out what level of problem that we have in various areas. So those are some of the things that we've done to try and gather more information to help us be smarter, to help us prioritize things. And that's really the name of the game, is prioritization. Because again, the needs far outweigh the resources that we can bring to bear. What you see there is basically the city of Fort Worth's capital improvement project prioritization matrix. So you got 4 categories and a bunch of sub-elements in each one of those categories. And so for stormwater, we take that, we define those different things based on stormwater terms and develop kind of an algorithm to put our different projects through and really see how they stack up from a priority standpoint. Where are we really going to get the most benefit from the cost? Where can we do the most good? So that helps a lot. There's still a lot of subjectivity that goes into something like that. It's certainly not completely empirical, but it does help considerably and really start to develop some tiers and help guide our decision making about where our money needs to go. But of course, looking at a stormwater program, it's a lot bigger than just the capital improvement program. You really want to prioritize everything you do in your program. So again, it's a real building block sort of thing. Some of the things I've already talked about. You got a lot of data out there. You need to get that data. You really need to understand what you have and how it affects the drainage throughout the city. So we've done a lot of that. We're continuing to do that. Again, criticality is a very, very important thing. You look at a part of the system, you say what's the likelihood that it's going to fail and what's the consequences if it does. Those two things come together to identify a criticality measure, which becomes a really important part, again, of prioritizing your capital improvement program and your maintenance program. So the prioritization scheme through these sorts of processes continuously gets refined. And again, it's not just about capital improvements, it's about what do you do with your maintenance dollars. We do things like mow channels, rehabilitate channels, and clean inlets, and repair head walls. We got to figure out where do we really need to be spending our maintenance dollar, what's giving us the best bang for the buck. When we go to do drainage basin evaluations, we don't want to be doing them in areas that really doesn't make a big difference. We want to focus those on the areas that are the most severe. And so continuously refining a prioritization scheme, leading to policies. The more that sort of information you have, the more wise decisions you can make about how are we going to pay for these things. What should be the right balance between debt financing and pay-as-you-go? What level of service should we expect? In the city of Fort Worth, we can't get the same level of service for the drainage system throughout the city. Some areas you can get 100-year, maybe even better protection. Some areas you're going to be lucky to get a 10-year protection. You really need to understand what's achievable in terms of level of service of the drainage system. And that starts to point to things like, here's what it's going to take to do it. We would need a fee increase to do this. And again, you have the information to make those decisions. How you allocate your resources between maintenance, studying, capital improvement, all those sorts of things. And as we move forward through that progress, one thing that we recognize, and we'll be doing a lot of over the next couple of years, is making sure the public is fully engaged with that. We don't want this scheme to be something that staff just develops and says this is the way it is. We want to make sure that we do the best we can to get out and hear from the community so that their input is integrated, so that we're really addressing it on a community-wide basis, and not just at the staff level. So as we build those blocks, we start to move more and more and more toward putting together a real comprehensive stormwater master plan. So we get that, we get all those priorities. Like I said, again, you stand looking at this mountainous need out there, and you look at your resources, which pale in comparison. We know we can't really get to things as quickly as we really need to. I'm still faced all the time with talking to people. I was on the phone call with a former mayor of Fort Worth just a little while ago out there. He's the part of town where that restaurant was. Floods all the time. One of the most rapidly developing parts of Fort Worth. It floods all the time. They're looking at us like, what are you guys going to do about this? It's going to cost $150 million to fix that problem. We need some help with that sort of thing. So we're doing more and more and more of that in terms of developing partnerships. And a lot of those come down to developing regional drainage solutions so that we're not just looking kind of granularly at a particular area. We're looking at how can we find people who have common interest in a particular area and intersect what they want to do with the flooding problem and do something that helps everybody. So this is just an example of some of the different areas in the city of Fort Worth where either we have done that or we're in the process of investigating those sorts of things. We're partnering up with other public and private entities and trying to jointly figure out how we can come together to meet a need on the private development side or another public side while addressing a community flooding issue. That helps us do things in a much more effective and efficient way, again, than just looking at these really small parts of town. It also has the added benefit of, in many cases, really revitalizing the economic base. Obviously, it really helps an area to do away with the flooding issue, the property values go up, but if that's really done in a very strategic way, you can optimize the improvement or the benefits of the economic base with these sorts of projects. And of course, it gives us a lot of opportunity to think not just about preventing flooding, but doing things in such a way that we can create an amenity for the community. We don't want to be the ones who are going all over the city, dropping in big concrete detention ponds with chain link fences around all over the place. We want to do these in such a way that it really contributes to the overall fabric of the community. So we've been working a lot to try to develop those. There's one picture of an example. This is an elementary school up here. The surrounding community had a serious flooding problem. About 5 years before this project, we had done another project with Fort Worth Independent School District. And so we knew that they were game for this sort of stuff. And many times when you look at these fully developed areas, the schools have the biggest pieces of green property. So that's the best place to go to look and say, hey, if that happens to be in a place where we could do something from a detention standpoint, maybe we got a win-win here. So we went in this area. They had, I think, just kind of a little rundown playground area out here. And so we come in and say, hey, how about if we build you a really nice athletic field with softball, with basketball, kind of an amphitheater style sort of thing. We'll build it, we'll design it, you give us the land, you take care of the day-to-day maintenance like mowing and the trash pickup. We'll take care of it when it's really big maintenance issues. When it rains really hard, it's going to fill up with water for a while. When it's going to drain off, it's going to dry up, and you can use it for an athletic field. So that's the sort of thing that we've been doing. This particular one got recognized by Stormwater Solutions magazine. So we're going to continue to look for that because, again, we clearly do not have the resources ourselves to move as rapidly through the issue as we would like to. So just to summarize, again, keys to our program, identifying that reliable, substantive resource that's going to be there to support this program, developing that information that you need to make good decisions, taking that information and having a logical, intelligible prioritization scheme that you can use to direct your money most effectively and do so also via creative partnerships to help you leverage the funding you have, which inevitably won't be enough to do everything you need. So that's my presentation.